Welcome back to another episode of Out of Touch. John with you as always. Dustin Schutte with us. And no Mitchell Page today. So it's going to be a duo episode from both of us. I've said before this, Mitch or Dustin, I don't know why I said Mitchell. I feel like the last couple duo episodes I've done have been with Mitchell, which is probably why I said that. But I kind of like these sometimes because I feel like it gives us an opportunity to go into places that we don't typically go whenever it's three of us. I feel like the three-person episodes tend to have more of a comedic tone to it, and the two-person episodes seem to have more of an introspective type of tone to it, if that makes sense.
I would agree with that. I feel like we get, and I've listened to some of your and Mitchell's pods when I've not been on, and I'm sure Mitchell listens to some of us. And it does like feels like we have these legitimate, like wisdomous conversations.
Yeah, I think sometimes we just like to we get into our own heads, and this is the place for us to take all of that thought matter, if you will, bring it out into the open, and I guess kind of release it, if that makes sense. So who knows what we're going to get into today. I have a couple of ideas of what direction we're going to go in. But first of all, those of you who are watching on YouTube, you probably already noticed Dustin looks a little more, I don't want to say professional, that's not the right word, but like his camera, it's very smooth. It's smoother than mine. And also his audio is less telephone like. And he's going to get himself a professional style microphone soon. But if you haven't already noticed from what he already said at the beginning, like Dustin Schutte, he's taken a big step forward to, I don't know, the wide world of podcasting, I guess.
I think professionalism is the correct word because I was just on a phone. So what happened is my other laptop that was really good for podcasting and doing shows and such busted. And I had to rely on this computer, which is, I don't know, 8 to 10 years old. So it was a little behind technologically. But
That's
what
right.
happened is about 2 weeks ago, I noticed that my laptop gave me one of those little notices that said, hey, time for an update. So I hit update one night when I went to bed. Came out the next morning, opened up my laptop, and it says new HDMI has been installed on your laptop. So I thought, hey, when John sends me the link, we're going to give it a shot and see if it helps. And what do you know? It's like going from 1998 to here's the comparison I'll make. Do you ever watch old, like in your case, Indiana basketball or Indiana football games from like 1995, like that are on Big Ten Network?
Yeah, like in those BTN on in 60 type shows. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen a few of those.
So when you're living it, like I remember watching games in 1998, 1999. In the time, you're like, wow, this is a great picture. I can see everything. This is fantastic. And then you look at it, you watch a game now from back then, and you're like, how did we survive as human beings watching sports? I can barely tell what a basketball is. That's how I feel right now.
I've got to say, you mentioning that makes me think back to, I guess, whenever I went to my first in-person, at least the first one that I can remember, first in-person sporting event was probably, I don't remember exactly the year, but probably the late 2000s, pre-2010-ish. And obviously TVs at that point were already progressing into the HD format, but it was kind of in its infancy. And I remember just going to a game and realizing what you had always seen in a picture, you seeing that in person, it was an overwhelming experience. And obviously, being a kid, it's probably going to be overwhelming regardless. But just seeing what you had only ever seen on television, mostly in a standard definition format, and then seeing it with your own two eyes when you had never really seen HD television, that is a massive jump. And well, I think that does make going to some sporting events, especially if you go to something that you're used to watching on HD TV nowadays, or even, I mean, I guess we're in the world of 4K and 8K. I don't have an 8K TV. I don't even have a 4K TV. I've got a 1080p. I'm still in that realm. But I feel like when you go to events nowadays, you don't really experience that same sense of wonder that you did, back whenever you were in standard definition.
You know what's funny is I want to know if anybody else does this. This can be a call in or this can be John, drop us the hotline number real quick because this
That's
could
right.
be a
502-830-9195.
So when I think about things that happen, so I watch a lot of classic movies, I watch a lot of history stuff, and a lot of that stuff's in black and white. So when I think of things that happened back then, my mind instantly goes to black and white. So like I'll give you an example. Like when I think of the actor Humphrey Bogart, I never think of what he looks like as like a person that has like is filled with color. Like I just think of black and white. Like you just think of that image. So anytime I think of like World War One, classic movies, The Great Depression, Winston Churchill, I'm just throwing out stuff. But anytime I think of like anything pre 1950, my mind automatically like sets this image to black and white, like a filter to black and white.
It's
and
funny, like you mentioned Humphrey Bogart. Even if you search him, like you'll see a black and white photo.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if you can even find a color. I'm sure. I mean, I guess you can with technology nowadays. I'm sure AI could create a colored photo of Humphrey Bogart if there isn't one already. But yeah, that's interesting. And
Is your
our
brain like that?
grandparents and people who were, born before the 1950s, I'm sure they don't really think in that matter, which is interesting.
No, they wouldn't, because I think, how would I say this? Like everything they were used to was black and white. That would have been like mostly digital, but they also didn't have the access to like all of that information came from books, right? Like they didn't have
Yeah.
they didn't really have a lot of images of things that were happening. So I mean, they probably had some images, and I'm sure it was all black and white. But when you didn't have the access to color photos or color television or whatever it might be, they probably didn't have the same problem. It's just the way it was. But that's just a weird, like you mentioned, how you see things differently. Like when I go back and watch, I think the History Channel did a thing where it was like World War II in color. And it is so weird to me.
I bet it is weird.
It's because all you've ever seen is stuff in like black and white. So when you watch that stuff in color, it's just a very different experience. I'm like, oh, I guess
should have seen it in color.
Oh, who is that?
That's Jamie. Almost said Jamie Chadwell. It's not Jamie. That's a football coach.
Yeah,
it's Jamie something. Who's the country singer that sings that?
You should have seen. Man. Well, you're dropping a quick.
I thought I would know that. Or Jamie Johnson. Jamie Johnson.
Oh, Jamie Johnson. Okay, there we go.
I'm ashamed I had to look that up. I'm not a country music fan, but I do like music, and I know that song clearly. But yeah, Jamie Johnson in color. And hopefully you all enjoyed my very subpar singing right there. So maybe we'll do more of that in the future. Anyway, if you haven't found us on TikTok yet, do that. Out of Touch Media is the @name. You could also find us there by searching Out of Touch Podcast. I'm learning the ropes of how to use TikTok, and it's been, I don't want to say an easy process, because it's not easy to learn something new that you're not super familiar with. But thanks to my buddy Elijah, who is very familiar with TikTok, it's been a transition to learning how to use that kind of thing a lot easier, and it's been nice to see some content that I put on there do fairly well so far. And I don't know what exactly is amazing versus what is bad, but considering I've not used it, I'm excited about being on TikTok. So, and if you're finding us on TikTok, be sure to look us up on YouTube, subscribe, Out of Touch Media, and you can find the full episodes of Out of Touch on YouTube there, or Spotify. Also coming soon to Apple Podcasts. I'll need to upload. I've got to do that sooner rather than later, because we're racking up the episodes. This is episode 26, and I've got to get them on there, because what I've learned is people are very loyal to their apps, Dustin.
Yep.
Like people use Spotify, people use Apple Music or Apple Podcasts, and they're not. Some people flip more than others. I'm not one of those people. I'm a Spotify user, and I'm not going. First of all, I don't even have an iPhone, so I don't think I would even be able to use Apple Podcasts. So, or can you? Am I wrong about that? Can you use Apple Podcasts if you have an Android?
That's a good question. I have no idea. I would think you could, but I don't. It might be more of a pain than it is. Like, I think the iPhone just comes with a podcast app, so I think that it's probably easier just to do it that way. But if you have an Android, I don't know. Good question.
So yeah, again, for people who are Apple users would obviously know that, but either way, and if you are an Apple user, which many of you are, I've been Android shamed many a time. and I will always be Android shamed. And I guess I'm comfortable living in that shame. So check us out, subscribe to us, follow along. We'll put clips on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff. And Dustin mentioned the hotline earlier, 502-830-9195 if you want to leave us a message. Very grateful for all those who have done so in the past. And I wanted to bring this question up for potential calls. I meant to do it last week, but we went down so many rabbit holes last episode that it just slipped my mind. But if you hate your job, give us a call. I want to know why you hate your job, because I feel like we always talk about why we love what we do, even though it doesn't pay that well in this specific field. But I know there's plenty of people out there who make plenty of money, and I don't want to know how much you make, but I know there's plenty of people out there who make a lot of money and they hate their job. Or maybe you make very little money and you hate your job. That's the worst of both worlds. So if you hate your job and you have a story or reason why, drop in on the hotline, 502-830-9195. I would be very curious to hear some of the potential responses from that.
What is the worst job, while we're on this topic, that you've ever had?
The worst job I've ever had. So I've never really, excuse me, I don't think I've ever genuinely hated a job, but this is still an easy answer for me, because when I was in college, I always had jobs. I had 3 different jobs during my time in college. 3 different jobs where the company was helping fund school in some way, shape, or form. One of those, I worked at UPS, third shift. That actually was not the worst one. I also worked as an RA, which I've mentioned before. I mentioned last episode, actually. And then I also worked, and I believe I only worked this job for about 6 months. I don't fully remember. It was a place called Yahagi. And it was the abbreviation was YAMI, Yami, but like the first, everyone always called it Yahagi or something like that. But essentially what it was a factory in BFE, Kentucky, really close to Mammoth Cave, actually, but it was in the middle of nowhere. And it was a factory job where my job specifically, I was someone who worked, I guess, in quality control. I had to like take parts of vehicles, and it wasn't like full parts. It was like little pieces of parts. And anything that was kind of deformed, you had to kind of cut things off. And it was very tedious work. And all the people that I worked with, they were nice for the most part, but I felt very out of my element as somebody who's not really from, BFE. I've never lived out in the middle of nowhere. And that's just a very different, I guess, I don't want to call it a culture shock, because it's not really what it was, but the way of living with those people is different than what I'm used to. So the combination of the people and the atmosphere and just the job itself being very boring, that's definitely the worst job I've had.
So I don't know if I know I have an answer. So I'm going to give, in college, I worked as like a fry cook every summer.
At the Krusty Krab?
Yeah, basically at the Krusty Krab. And it was on a dam in Monticello, Indiana. It's called the Oakdale Dam Inn. And I mean, it was hot. It was busy. It was in the middle of the summer, and we worked on a lake, right? That's one place people would go to drink beer and get bar food and all that stuff. So that wasn't fun. But I think the worst job I've ever had was out of college. I could not find a job because I graduated in 2010. So the economy sucked and it was hard to get a job. And I had to resort to landscaping. And woo, buddy, if you want to get in shape, if you want every allergy in your body tested, take up landscaping. And look, if you love landscaping, go for it. But manual labor all day is not my thing. I hated it so much.
Especially in the heat. What part of the country were you living in at the time?
At the time, I was living in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Okay, that's better than South Georgia and other places you've been.
Correct. It is better than that. But what I will say is, what was funny was it was so hot and dry that summer that nothing really grew. So you would go by houses and there'd be nothing to cut because the last time we went there, it was still that short because it got no water and didn't grow. So everything was either dead or didn't grow. So it was kind of a good summer to like get that out of the way. But that was one job. And I think it was like me being a college graduate at that time, being like, I went to school. I should have like, I should be indoors in air conditioning. I should be doing something, a little bit more meaningful. But the reason I say that is to bring this up is there was a time when I worked at Saturday Tradition. I think there was 2 times actually when I got laid off because that's just how the business works. If you're in sports writing, tip to anybody wanting to go into journalism or sports writing, there are a lot, like it's an unstable business. Also in radio too, John will tell you.
Yeah.
But I resorted to retail for about 3-4 months. It was maybe one of the best jobs I've ever had.
And that's interesting because I feel like a lot of people who work in retail hate it. And I'm not somebody who ever did, but it's definitely something I'm glad I didn't have to do.
And I don't know. I think if I would have done it right out of college, I think I would have hated it. But because it was like a break in between. So when you work and you're a writer, there's a lot of nights or a lot of days when you're working 12, 14, 16 hours and you go to bed, you get your nap in and then you do it again. And so when you're continually on that grind, and then I got laid off and had to go do retail. And what I'm doing is working my 8-hour shift with a half-hour break. And then I'm done and don't have to worry about anything else. I just go home and enjoy the rest of my day. That part of it to me was very enjoyable. Plus, it was at Disney Springs, which is like the downtown business
that's
area part of Disney World. So you always had not always. You had some really grumpy guests, but you did have a lot of like just happy people that were just glad to be there. So like a lot of people put down these jobs that they think everybody can do or what, but like, so in my instance, like landscaping, worst possible job I've ever had. Retail, one of the most, like it was a really fun 4-month stretch for me just because I think it was a nice break from everything I had been doing. I don't even know if I can explain it. It was fun though.
You mentioned Disney, and it made me want to go ahead and bring up something that I guess I probably would have brought up in the future, but why not go ahead and bring it up now? So I know in the past I have made fun of, maybe not in a super...
Oh, here we go.
Oh, yeah, it's coming. I made fun of the Disney adults, and, rightfully so. Disney adults are what they are. But friends of ours have invited my wife and I to a little Disney vacation this spring where there's a chance we'll be going on. So I guess I'll have to eat crow and shush up about the Disney adults as I will be an adult in Disney World potentially later this spring.
You don't have to eat crow. Look, so this is what I always tell people. Everybody's got their own thing. It doesn't matter if it's video games, it's Disney World, it can be sports. Everybody geeks out on some things, or in a lot of cases, multiple things, right? But what I will put the qualifier in there on is, again, I'm going to go back to to my job. So when I worked there, you have a lot of really positive interactions with people. And before I moved to Orlando, I worked at Ivy Tech Community College, which is a large community college network in Indiana, which most of our listeners probably know what that is. I got more "thank you, you made my vacation" comments in Disney in 4 months than I got appreciation comments in my 4 or 5 years working at Ivy Tech. And these are people that I helped get degrees. And I'm not saying that you don't go into those professions or you don't do those jobs for the thank you, but it's nice to hear, right?
Yeah.
So when you have that experience, there's a little bit more of a reason as to why I enjoy Disney as opposed to just maybe the regular person. It's because I have a closer tie to it than probably most people. So I will take the shame. I will take the Disney adulting comments. I don't take them personally. But that's kind of my reason as to why, if you want to label me that way, you can label me that way. So
again, that was a little spiel on bad jobs. It's not really a spiel, but it's the word I chose to use. If you have a bad job experience, if you know someone who had a bad job experience, hit the hotline 502-830-9195 because bad job stories are, I mean, they can be some of the funniest and best ones. So
I want to think of one for like our next episode. I want to think if I've had a bad job. I know I have job stories, but I don't know that they're bad job stories.
I'll tell you what, something happened today at my job, and it's actually happened 3 times. And so obviously working in radio, we're in the studio and stuff like that. And sometimes we get notifications on our phone when a guest has arrived at the studio. And we honestly, it doesn't happen very often. And if it happens, we're expecting somebody specific. Well, 3 times, and I'll just talk about today specifically. 3 times this has happened. A random person from off the street comes into our little lobby area, because you can get into our lobby at iHeart in Louisville without having to use the pass, is like the check-in pass, as long as it's during working hours. So you can get into that little lobby, and in there you can sign in and let the people in the front office know that you're here to see so and so, but they still have to confirm with us and that kind of thing. Well, this homeless, I don't want to say homeless because I don't really know, but that's just kind of the aura he was giving off. This person was trying to make up a reason as to why we were having him on the show, and he was just some random guy off the street, and it's happened 3 times. And it's super uncomfortable because I don't know if it's the same guy, but after he was done in the lobby and the person in our front office area, let him go away, he just stood outside of our, outside the building. And, we have a lot of glass. I think I hope to God it's bulletproof glass, considering we're downtown. But he just kind of stared in the window, and I just walked back to the studio and tried to ignore it. But it was super weird and uncomfortable. I mean, people trying to get in and say you're a guest on a radio show. What? Obviously, he wasn't going to do that. But if he would have been let in, there's no telling what could have happened.
Right. Yeah, that's awfully ballsy, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I hope I described that well enough. It's super weird and uncomfortable. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but again, it's happened 3 times in the past maybe 6 months, and I think very weird.
The staring in the window part is creepier than the guy actually trying to get in and be on the radio.
Yeah, because specifically today, it was dark and rainy, and it was like the sun had already pretty much gone down, and so it was just very, very ominous image, I guess. So,
yeah, that sounds like
real quick, Dustin.
Nightmares.
Oh yeah, it easily give anyone nightmares. So hopefully it doesn't happen again. Dustin, I heard you've been trying to find some new TV shows to watch, and I saw you interact with somebody on Twitter, and I had to respond because I saw that you are indeed watching, or you've at least seen an episode of Community.
Was that sitcom. Somebody interacting with? Was that Abby?
Well, not the first time. It ended up being Abby, your girlfriend. She responded to the message that I sent to you after I saw that you were going to watch Community. But after I saw that, I knew we were going to talk about it on the podcast today, and I decided to wear, and I have to maybe stand up a little bit, my Troy and Abed in the Morning T-shirt, which I don't know if you've seen any episode where that's part of the content, but Troy and Abed in the Morning is the fake radio show, fake morning show that 2 of the main characters will pretend to have in random spots around the community college campus, and it's hilarious.
So I am through the first 5 episodes. It's kind of my type of show.
I think you would really like it.
I think, and it's just starting, like I got through the first 3 episodes were a little dry, and then this last one was pretty good. So episode 4 I thought was pretty good. So I laughed quite a bit.
That was not because last night, in a minute, I'm going to give, someone asked me to give, which actually was your girlfriend. So she wanted me to give my top 5 Community episodes. So I will do that special request in just a moment.
Yes,
but I think you said episode 4. Is that the psychology episode where they're doing an experiment on Abed or something like that?
Yes.
Sitting in the waiting room.
Yeah, he's in the waiting room. They do like a study. I can't remember what they're studying, but it's some sort of effect, and he just sits there for 26 hours.
It's good. Abed, I don't know who will end up being your favorite character if you make it through the entire show, but
Oh,
I
I'll
think
make sure.
Abed ended up being my favorite character when it was all said and done.
Well, so she showed me in by like so Abby came. She was over here this last weekend, and I don't know. I honestly don't remember. She could probably tell you how we got on the topic, but we started talking about the darkest timeline, and so she put on that episode, and I watched that episode, and I was like, I can get in. This is a show I can get into, and it's one that I could probably watch like one episode of if I have a free 25, 30 minutes, or it's one that I can kind of binge and watch 6 to 8 episodes. To me, like 6 to 8 episodes is pretty much max.
Yeah.
So I just watched 3 last night. I watched 2 more today. So I'm through the first 5 episodes of the show. It's pretty good. And then at the same time, concurrently, I'm also watching Yellowstone, and I'm in the middle of season 2 of Yellowstone. I really like that show. It makes me feel like a cowboy, and even though I'm not. But yeah, so those are the 2 shows I'm on. Abby also recommended The House of Usher. I think it's called The House of Usher, which is, I guess, about Edgar Allan, like lit. How do you want to say it? They're basically reinventing. I cannot think. Damn, John, I am a writer, and I talk, and I cannot think of any words to say. So
that
anyway,
happens to all. It's called writer's block, and sometimes I guess it's talker's block.
I guess it's talker's block. Anyway, it's basically the Edgar Allan Poe stories, like those short stories. They made a series out of them. So that's another one. Somebody recommended The Bear. I have no idea what that is. Never.
I've seen commercials for that. So many commercials for it. I don't know why YouTube thinks I need to watch The Bear, but I keep seeing commercials for that show.
The Bear. I wish I could go through all of these tweets that I got because there were a ton of recommendations from last night. I'm going to see real quick. I'm scrolling and talking now at the same time. Fargo. Oh, we watched the Fargo movie. I had never seen Fargo.
Is Fargo? So as you mentioned, it's a movie. Is that based off a series, or is there a series based off a movie?
Yeah. So the series is based off the movie. So I just watched the movie. Now it makes me want to watch the series. Somebody recommended The Roman Empire, Morning Show on Apple TV, Goliath on Amazon Prime.
I've not seen Morning Show, but I've seen a trailer for it. It's got Steve Carell and Jennifer Aniston and Reese Witherspoon. It looks okay. I've got to say though, anything that Steve Carell's in that's not The Office now is really hard for me to watch because I associate him so much with Michael Scott. And he does fine in other roles, like in Bruce and Evan Almighty. He's fine in that. And I even watched the Netflix show Space Force that came out. I guess it was a couple years ago. The first season of that was okay. It was fine. The second season I thought was a step forward, but it didn't get the viewership to warrant a third season. And I understand why. And I think because of that is why it's tough to see Steve Carell in anything other than The Office.
I could not get in. I tried that show, could not get into it.
So what about it? Why couldn't you follow or go all the way through it? I guess what turned you off of Space Force?
I don't know if it's been so long since I watched it. I just remember watching like 3 or 4 episodes and being like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. Yeah, I just didn't think it was funny. I didn't think it was like, was it even supposed to be funny? Because if I see Steve Carell, I'm thinking something's supposed to be funny. And I remember just like not laughing and being like, this is not a good time.
There was too much of a serious undertone to it. I feel like that kept it from being funny. And again, I don't know how many episodes you got in, but there's a side storyline about his wife who is in prison. And it might even be his ex-wife, but the person who plays the wife / ex-wife is Lisa Kudrow. And that whole storyline between him and her, and it's not a bad storyline, but it's, again, there's too many serious aspects in that show that I think keep it from being really good. I do think the actor, and I'm blanking on his name, and I'm even blanking on the character's name, but the guy who's essentially Steve Carell's sidekick in that show, he's really funny. I think his actor's name is John, but I cannot think of what his last name is. But oh well, that's neither here nor there. I want to get into my top 5 Community episodes, and I'm going to try to talk about them without spoiling anything because,
oh boy,
and again,
this ought to be fun.
Spoilers in sitcoms aren't really, I mean, it's
Aren't
not
really
as
spoilers.
big of a deal as in like a serious show, but at the same time, I don't want to say anything that would potentially
Well,
give something away.
no, for sure. I think there are certain things that you can say in certain sitcoms where it'd be a spoiler. So, like, have you seen The Good Place?
No.
Okay, so I'm not even going to say anything because there are spoilers in that. But like everybody's seen The Office. If you said, "Oh yeah, did you see Jim and Pam's wedding?" Like that would be a spoiler. But I
Yeah.
think a lot of a lot of
I
things you
think
can talk.
that's almost so mainstream in pop culture though that people
Right.
just know that though.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is like usually with sitcoms, it's hard to. It's more for the laugh, so you don't
Yeah.
really spoil anything. There are a few times you might be able to spoil a storyline, but it's not frequent.
Yeah, like characters leaving the show. I think that's
Right.
kind of considered a spoiler because you never know how that's going to happen, whether they get killed off or they just move away, that kind of thing. So I'll try to not do that here, and we'll see how it goes. I'll go from 5 to 1. My fifth favorite Community episode is intermediate documentary filmmaking. And I'll just say the reason I like it. So they actually do this episode in the style of the way that an Office episode is done. So they have like the people talking in front of the camera, and I won't say too much more about that. But one thing I will say is that it is a very funny episode for Pierce, Chevy Chase's character.
Okay.
And first of all, how do you feel about Pierce so far? I feel like he's a very divisive character in Community.
I mean, I don't know why he would be divisive. I feel like they just tried to get a little bit of everybody, like a little, different type of personalities, because that's what they were going for. Like everybody's got a different personality that forms this study group. And so I
Yeah.
think he just kind of fits that. And Chevy Chase, he's probably more of him. This is based on the 5 episodes I've watched.
Yes.
He's probably more like himself in that than he's ever been in any other movie. Like he's kind of a jackass in real life. And so
He's kind of a jackass in the show.
that's what I'm saying. So he probably that's probably like more closer to like the real Chevy Chase than you've ever seen in any other movie. I could be wrong,
Yeah.
but
And this is a very jackass type of again, like I said, it's a good episode for him. He is very much an ass in this episode, and it is, again, I think it's very funny. So intermediate documentary filmmaking. Take notes, Dustin, for when you get to these episodes.
that's right.
You don't
All right.
have to, but you can if you want. Number 4, critical film studies. And again, one that I'm going to try not to spoil, because one thing, if you haven't noticed, I don't think it happened so much in the early seasons, Dustin, but there's a lot of referential humor, and they do like parodies of stuff, and you'll notice that more as the show goes on. But critical film studies so Jeff and Abed have this interesting dinner date, and again, date, I use that term loosely. They're not dating, but they have I'll say no more. It is a very well thought out episode with a twist at the very end that is both parts hilarious and I guess rewarding, if that's the best way to say it. So that's why that one left an impact on me. Critical film studies. Number 3, mixology certification. Troy, the character Troy, turns 21. And again, it's hilarious. And when anybody's turning 21 in the TV show, you can only imagine what kind of episode that'll be. So I think that's really funny. Number 2, the one I mentioned, the one that got brought up earlier and on Twitter, remedial chaos theory. And I think this is the episode that made me realize how good the show actually was as a whole at just doing different stuff. Because you mentioned the darkest timeline. In this episode, they roll a dice to decide who is going to pick up go to the front door and pick up the pizza that's being delivered. And the episode takes you through what would happen if the dice landed on a different number assigned to a different person. And the fact that they could come up with 6 or 7 different ways,
Right.
On how things would go down if somebody different went and got the pizza is just genius. And again, also very funny. A lot of people actually say that that's their favorite episode. And again, understandably so. The reason my number 1 episode is not that, and my number 1 episode is studies in modern movement. And I don't think that's a very common one to be the favorite, but for some reason, it resonated with me different than a lot of others. And I think it's because it's a good episode for every single character. Pierce has really fun moments. Jeff has some fun moments. Jeff and the Dean specifically. Have you met the Dean yet, Dustin?
Yes.
Jeff and the Dean have a really fun moment at doing some karaoke. They sing, I'm not even going to give it away because it's one of my favorite scenes. Again, not for any particular reason, but the Dean and Jeff have a really funny episode, one of my favorites in the whole series. And then Britta and Shirley have a fun interaction with a homeless person, which is interesting. And then Troy, Abed, and Annie have their own antics going on. But again, the reason I think I like it the way that I do, just overall, great episode for every single character, and it's just good. So hopefully I didn't bore everyone to death if you haven't seen the show Community, but it's one of my favorite shows, and I had a request to share my top 5 episodes. And,
we are people pleasers on this podcast, John. If nothing else.
And if someone's going to offer me to do something that I would love to do regardless, I'm going to do it. So, absolutely. And if you haven't seen the show Community, give it a shot. My wife actually hates it. She hates the show. I think she just hates how just silly it is and how at times a lot of things that happen are unrealistic. But who cares? It's a very good show to have on when you want to watch something, I guess, mindless. And it's not even that it's that mindless. It's a very smart show, the way they present everything, but it's just a fun show to watch.
Yeah, but you don't have to, I watch Yellowstone, and you can't really miss 5 minutes without maybe missing a major plot line. And I think most sitcoms are pretty mindless. Like if you step away to go get a drink or go to the bathroom or something, you're not going to miss a whole lot. Sometimes you might, but usually you're not. I think it's a mindless show.
Well, I'll be excited to hear your thoughts on your, first of all, the show as a whole, if you decide to go all the way through it. And then if any of your favorites line up with what my favorites are.
And we can do a rehash of this and
I'm curious if Mitchell's seen any of this. I've never talked about this show on the podcast, right? So I don't think I would have any reason to know if he knows this show.
I feel like Mitchell is someone who just watches movies. He probably watches TV shows, but he gives
now, he and I talked about The Blacklist a few weeks ago, so I do know he watches some TV shows.
Okay, well then, The Blacklist.
Have you seen The Blacklist? I'm not going to get into it because I know we talked enough about TV, but have you seen The Blacklist at all?
I've watched episodes, but I've never watched them in order, nor have I ever sat down and been like, okay, I'm going to watch this. I've just seen I've gone to my parents' house and they're big fans of it, so I've seen probably 5 or 6 episodes, but I had no idea what the actual storyline is.
Well, there you go. Check it out. If you need to dedicate some time to The Blacklist if that's something that you like. I'm on season 5. There's 10 total seasons of it, but I started that show maybe 3 or 4 years ago. It's because I've watched so many different things. Sometimes you have to take a break from the ones that take more time and things you have to think about what you're watching. So, yeah. All right, Dustin. I'm going to talk a little bit. Let's talk about some traffic. Whenever you're stuck in traffic or you're driving somewhere, and
this happens a lot.
This thing popped into my head. This is probably a couple weeks ago. I was heading home from work and somebody had cut me off, and I gave him the old honk. And I think this thought has popped into my head a few different times, and it's just a weird thing to think about. And that's, do you ever wonder when another driver might be cussing you out, whether it's because of something you did wrong or because they're so angry about the situation that they're in that they're just letting you have it? Because I feel like a lot of times we as individuals and human beings, when we're on the road, we don't really think about the other people around us. We think that we are the most important people on the road at the time. And it's because we have no way in humanizing any of the drivers in the cars around us. So we just see them as other vehicles, and we may give them the bird. We may say a few choice vocabulary words at them because we don't know them. And maybe this is a weird thing to get into, but it's interesting how we are unable to put ourselves in the shoes of other drivers because we're so worried about what we're doing.
I don't know if I've ever thought about that. Like, I think about that when I see people actually cussing me out. Like, you can tell when somebody's like full of rage, right?
Yes.
But I don't know if I've ever thought about like, oh, unless it's like blatantly obvious. Like, I was stopped at a four-way stop first, and I'm just sitting there, and somebody's waiting on me to go, or I cut somebody off, or whatever the case might be. I don't know, but I don't ever think about that.
Are you
Maybe
are
now I
you
will.
someone who like if you're dealing with road rage, are you somebody who typically honks or is
No,
visually no nothing?
I don't do anything because I would like to live. I don't know if
And
anybody else
see,
has
yeah,
a gun.
that so whenever I'm in a situation where I know that they I guess technically anytime they can do anything about it, but it's a lot easier to get angry at somebody who can't see you, like if you're going 70 or 80 on the
Yeah,
expressway. Whereas if you're at a four-way stop and you can see them, and if you have the guts to flip somebody off or let someone know visually that you are angry and you are both at a stopping point or you have nowhere to go because it's a stop sign or somebody else is ahead of you or behind you, whatever it may be, you have some guts to do that because all it takes is finding somebody on the wrong day at the wrong time to stop, put their car in park, and get out and come say something to you in your face. And again, it could be worse than that. They could have a weapon
correct.
on them. And I'm not trying to assume somebody's going to do that, but you said you wanted to live earlier, Dustin. So clearly you're thinking logically about your interactions with people in traffic.
I am thinking about that. I just don't. I mean, I don't want to piss off the wrong person.
No, I don't either.
Like,
When I was in high school, some buddies of mine and I were going over to a friend's house who lived down the road or whatever. And I was in my car with a few friends, and there was a car ahead of me who had some other friends in it. And they were tailing behind this big SUV. And there would
mhm,
be no way in them knowing who they were behind. But the the driver ended up being some people who were in the military. I don't know if they were active people in the military or if they were off duty or what. I don't know anything about them other than the fact that they were affiliated with the military. So what happened was these guys come to a stop, and obviously, naturally, they stop behind them, and then I'm the car behind them, so I stop as well. And two guys get out of the car and they go up to the
mm,
driver and then the guy in the passenger window, and they make them roll their windows down, and they both start going off and screaming at them because they're tailing them. And there may have been some other things going on as well. And again, I'm not going to use names here, but I do believe one of my friends was in there mooning people from the back seat. And I don't know if
of
he
course,
was mooning this
always how
guy.
it starts. Yep, always
I
how
do
it
remember
starts.
that being a factor in some way. And if you're listening to this, and there's a chance this person is, feel free to call the hotline and correct me if I'm saying anything wrong. 502-830-9195.
Is
But
mooning still a thing? Do people do that
yeah, I
still?
mean, it may have been I guess, when was I in college? Almost 8 years ago now, right? It's 2024. I guess, man. I started, not college, high
You
school.
started mooning people in college. Okay,
I mean,
continue.
I said, first of all, I don't know if I'll go back and listen to this, but I said that this was a high school story, right? Because it was high school.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I started high school in 2012. It is now 2024. It has been 12 years since I was a freshman in high school, which is kind of weird to think about. Let's do one more thing here, and
Well,
then
I was gonna ask this question though. So this is maybe a weird thing. I think that I am a fairly good driver, especially on highways.
I
Get
think
to
many
where I'm
people
going.
think that they are, and I would be in that boat as well. I think a
Okay,
lot of people think they're good drivers.
here's where I'm gonna steer off into a different direction, and there are many people who can attest to this. I am a terrible, nervous parker. I will park as first of all, I'm a terrible parallel parker. I will refuse to do it. I would rather walk 6 miles in the rain than parallel park right next to a store. Also, now if I can just pull into a spot, I'm fine with that. But if I have to go forward, back in, my car doesn't have a mirror. I'm not a NASCAR driver. I don't know what I'm doing. So I don't like to park. At the grocery store, I will park as far away from other cars as I possibly can. I don't know what it is. It gives me a sense of nervous energy that I cannot explain.
I'll say something. So parking and parallel parking and parking in general doesn't really make me anxious, but I will say a couple things. One, I do avoid parking near other cars. I think it's just a natural instinct. Just give yourself more room. But it pisses me the hell off why people can't just park inside the lines. And here's the thing, you can, even if you do it wrong the first time, all you've got to do, and people refuse to do this, back up and realign yourself.
Yep.
Because there is, especially in a parking garage, I park in a parking garage for my job, and I'm sure many people do if you work downtown. But there's nothing more aggravating than having less than, I don't know, this amount of space to be able to open your door when you've parked just fine, but the person next to you has half of their big ass tire into your lane,
Right.
and they just didn't think about it. They didn't think about taking the extra, I don't know, 20 seconds to realign.
Right. We were in Madison for the Wisconsin-Nebraska game, and we had to park in this guy's lawn, and you had to do it in such a way so they could, bicycling, so they could basically maximize their space and fit in as many cars in there. And he could make, instead of 110, he could make 180 or whatever he was charging. I mean, he got so pissed. I think he was pissed because I could not follow basic instructions. I think the passenger was getting frustrated with my inability to follow instructions. But it's like that feeling of like, I'm trying to do what I'm doing, and then you just have this guy yelling at me of what to do. And he wasn't being a jackass. He was just trying to make it so I could hear and park properly.
Yes.
But it was like so much going on that my brain couldn't comprehend. And I'm sure that this had to be hilarious. If like you were just walking down the street, John comes strolling down, I parked my car, I'm going to go to a bar, and you were watching what was happening, it had to be a top 5 funniest thing you've ever seen.
Who was the passenger who was getting frustrated with you?
It may or may not have been someone mentioned earlier on this show. For the record, she maintained her poise. She did not seem like she was frustrated, but I think if I was in the passenger seat, I would have been frustrated with me. So
it is tough. It's tough being, first of all, the driver when somebody else is critiquing your driving, but it's also tough being in the passenger seat and keeping your mouth shut.
Well, right. I mean, like I said, it was a frustrating experience for me. I think it was just like, how can he not do this? And I don't know. It was okay. A weird thing.
Sometimes our anxiety makes something that is so simple, something that can be the hardest thing in the world.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, but what was funny was like, we got out of the car, and as soon as we got out of the car, I was able to make a joke. Everybody was laughing about it. We were having a good time. I'm like, dude, I am not like trying to ruin your day. I just could not get it through my brain. And so it was all good, but it was just one of those things where like, you ever know, like, so I've got this guy yelling at me. Sometimes I've talked about this before. Like I panic when people watch me do things. And so I think that's what happened. I had 4 eyes watching me try to park this car. And I was like, just went into like shell shock mode.
But are you the kind of person when you're, oh, go ahead. Finish your story.
I was going to say it had to be a top 5 funniest thing that I could not move this car in the giant space and follow this guy's very basic instructions.
Are you the kind of person who, if you are in public, especially by yourself, you feel like everybody is watching you?
Yes. Yeah, all the time. Sense. Like when I'm at the checkout counter and I'm getting change and I can't put it in my wallet fast enough, I panic.
I've got to say, one of the most stressful things or situations to be, and again, this is relative, is when you're at the self-checkout line on a busy day and you feel like the person is waiting for you to get out of their way. Even though you may still have plenty of things to scan, they're watching you as if you better hurry the hell up because it's my turn. Even though there may be 5 other scanners that could open up before yours.
Do you also, Do you do this? So this got us down another tangent. So I don't go through fast food restaurants very often. I will on road trips because you got to eat. Are you ever cognizant of what you're ordering when you? Because if like there's somebody that pulls up behind you, I'm like, I don't want them to hear what my big ass is about to order. Like I'm embarrassed by what I'm about to order. Like
No, I
it
don't
just
even think
clicks
about
in my
that.
brain. Like, oh crap, somebody's gonna be listening in to this giant order.
Well, this feels like a whole thing we need to dig into on a deeper level some other time. The things that make us uncomfortable
Cringe.
in public in
Yeah.
general. Because I don't think there's a lot for me, but you have opened the door for me to at least think about. Because I'm sure there are some things I'm just not thinking of. Because I feel like I'm pretty comfortable in my own skin, especially because one thing I've learned about myself is that I am way more introverted now than I was before the pandemic. And there could be a number of factors on why that's the case. I think one, the pandemic, like I just said, but also at that time, I got married. I started my first professional job after college. So a lot of things happened at the same time that I guess were overwhelming. So again, it may not just be the pandemic, but I always relay it back to that time just because that was an introverted person's dream being in the pandemic and being able to quarantine, even though it wasn't an ideal situation. But I think since then, I've learned that after I've learned, I guess, to enjoy being around myself more and in situations where I am by myself, I'm just, I guess, able to enjoy it more. I don't know. I feel like I did a very poor job at describing that, but hopefully it came across the right way.
No, when you're happy being, I don't know if this is going to sound correct or not, but when you're happy, like just being alone, like you find, maybe not being happy, but when you find hmm,
Peace.
peace. Yeah, peace is a good word. When you find peace of like just doing stuff by yourself, like the awkwardness is over. Like this is what I found through hiking, and it's very relaxing to me. Like I love to go hiking with people. I have friends who love to go hiking. Abby will go hiking with me sometimes. Um, but also if they don't, like I'm perfectly fine doing an 8 to 10 mile hike by myself, whether that's headphones or just me and nature or whatever the case might be. But once you establish that, like then you can do anything. I went
Yeah.
to 2 seasons of Kennesaw State basketball games when I lived in near Atlanta by myself every game. It's fantastic. Never
Finding solace in the lonely can be good sometimes.
right.
I don't know if that sentence made sense, but I like
That's
the
gonna
way
be
it
our
sounded.
that's gonna be our mission statement from now on.
I don't even know if I can repeat what I just said. What is it? The solace in the lonely is what it
Good
is.
sometimes. Yeah, I don't
Is
know.
good
Go
some-
back and listen to it, and that'll be our quote for the week or something. We'll put it
Maybe.
on the mast.
All right. I think that's going to wrap it up for today's episode. Thanks as always for tuning in. If you want to respond to anything that we said, send us a message on the hotline 502-830-9195. Also, follow us on TikTok at Out of Touch Media. Also, can be found under Out of Touch Podcast. And subscribe to us on YouTube, Out of Touch Media, and on Spotify, coming soon to Apple Podcasts. So thanks again, as always. We will talk to you next week. Hopefully, Mitchell will be back with us. But until then, we'll see you next time.